That's not normal in the wild to see a 500%. It's simultaneously, it's a shocking number, but I also find it a very credible number.
AI in the SDLC. We've had a lot of chatter in the community about using AI agents to write code, throwing around the words, the agentic SDLC, the AI-native SDLC. But what does that even mean? It's very hard to get a definitive answer of what is the AI SDLC, what is the impact of all these tools that we have in the market on the SDLC, and how do we break it down? So today, I'm Sid, co-founder and CTO of Blitzy. Today we have Adam from Jellyfish, and Adam's going to introduce himself.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Adam Ferrari. Like you mentioned, I'm with Jellyfish. I'm an advisor there, helping with the AI product strategy. So I spent a lot of time looking at exactly the stuff you were just talking about. It's been, like you say, an amazing year of transformation, moving from sort of code assistance to really like agents and broader adoption across the entire software development lifecycle. Jellyfish as a company is originated with software engineering intelligence, so metrics for engineering leaders to understand engineering productivity, developer experience, things like that. But it's been very transformative over the last couple of years as the real burning question has been, how is AI impacting all that? How is it impacting our productivity, what we're delivering? So an exciting time. My background, I'm a multi-time CTO, VPE. I was a longtime Jellyfish customer, so got involved with them as they're navigating this transformation. It's very interesting to me. It's kind of a fun ringside, sort of at the epicenter role I'm getting to play here, watching all this transformation happen.
I love that. What Jellyfish is doing is really helping the CIO answer the question, what is the real impact, right? We've got a lot of AI tools that claim to be amazing at crushing the leaderboards. But does that really translate to the real world to what your engineers are doing day in and day out?
Yeah.
And then let's take even a step back and look at what the SDLC even really means. So we'll put up a visualization here of our interpretation and big picture of the SDLC. So what you can see here is we have right at the beginning, at the far left, the roadmap, which is the vision of the enterprise's plans for the next 1 year, 1 to 3 years, right? And then you have design as a fundamental starting point, where you talk about product design, engineering design, the product requirements, technical requirements, testing requirements, all the business levers that this sprint or this piece of software enables. And then you go into implementation. And that's where code generation happens. So a lot of the discussion around code and AI in the SDLC frequently happens to be just focused on the implementation phase, right?
Yes.
You talk about code generation, you talk about the ability of AI to write code better. You talk about how engineers are now not even writing code most of the times. It's like just wiping it out with the AI tools. But you miss the point that coding is such a small part of the entire SDLC.
Increasingly small as we make code basically free.
Exactly. Code is now a commodity. Like you can get code like anyhow, right? You can get great coding from open source models. So it's virtually free except for the cost of compute, right? But then you have all these steps that have to take place before you even get to writing a single line of code, right? Which defines whether you're writing great, usable production-grade code or you're writing AI slop, right? And then even after you get the code, you have like review, testing, security checks, QA, deployment, and then observability once the code is actually deployed, right? So tell us more about how Jellyfish fits into this space, and how we can break down our understanding of this further.
Yeah, so I mean, Jellyfish fundamentally is trying to help engineering leaders, company leadership understand, they're implementing all this AI assistance in the software process. Is it having an effect? And the interesting thing about that problem with respect to this is it's been a moving target. Like you say, when we started out maybe a year and a half or more ago, a lot of focus just on that coding task, like what was my PR throughput. But quickly you could see, like by virtue of having to measure it, we're trying to also closely track what are the practices. And you could see over the last year the emergence of a broader view, bringing AI into more of the steps. You could see this in, for example, adopting these more command line tools like a Claude Code and doing more of the workflow, doing the planning, doing context development, actually doing the task breakdown, a lot of adoption of sort of test-driven development so that you could actually get quality, right, versus having something shooting in the dark. So you're seeing very actively the cutting-edge orgs and engineers take on more of those steps, and we've seen that firsthand. And it's forcing, for us, trying to measure that, to take a broader view. So what you've seen over the last year is a lot of expansion in the metrics being used to measure AI impact. So it started out very much with sort of adoption. Are we even using? Quickly took on things like acceptance rate, like, okay, it generates, does it generate anything useful? Then we started to see like more adoption of like core engineering metrics, flow metrics, like cycle time, throughput, quality, like what's your change failure rate, what's your rework rate, that kind of stuff. And I think you're now starting to see like engineering leaders want to drive to outcomes. Like, are we seeing more product value? Are we spending more of our time and our expense on innovation? Those kinds of high level, board level metrics of R&D impact.
Right. Yeah. Well, tell us, what does it even mean? When you look at the operating dashboards of many of these AI tools, they're talking about how many tokens you've consumed as an org. Yeah. Right. What does that even mean as a CIO? If some of my engineers have consumed tens of millions of tokens and some of the other engineers have consumed just million tokens, what is the ultimate measure for me as a CIO to understand if the AI rollout in my org is really even effective?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to be an apologist for the value. There's value there, because I think over the last year, there was a very basic problem of trust in these tools. And you got some, I know I could feel it in the beginning. I started playing with those tools probably when they were not ready yet for prime time. And you'd get some bad output, some dumb code. And you'd be like, oh, this is going to waste my time more than it's going to save my time. So I think we had to look at adoption and then acceptance rate and some of those basics that you see in the dashboards from the native tools. We had to start there because we needed to cross the chasm of some acceptance. But it happened actually in an interesting way. I don't think developers suddenly got magical, absolute trust, but they got enough trust, and also they built enough competency in how to use the tools to get good output and to use surrounding supporting structures like TDD, that suddenly they got measured trust, effective trust. That meant that it was like, not that they could absolute trust the output, but they could put it in a box and put it on rails enough such that they could get value out of it. So I think that's been a moving target. Now, is that satisfactory? No. First, basics. One of the basic things we're solving with Jellyfish is all those different analytics that come from the tools are different. How do you make sense of your overall organization effective? Even, over the last year, there was a ton of experimentation. There's very much a mindset of like, use whatever tools you want to use. We're going to figure out what's good. And also, by the way, they're changing every week. New ones are coming. So you couldn't pin it down. I think there's a feeling now that maybe playing with new tools isn't where the money's at, like actually developing best practices on some thoughtfully selected tools. But it means you want to be able to measure across the heterogeneous tools. Because I do think it's not maybe one tool. Maybe orgs will have, there's some engineers are going to be happier in more of like a cursor IDE style. Some are going to be more happy, managing CLI and background work. I think we're all going to be doing some amount of background work, and maybe it's going to become task specific. So I think what you're seeing is a journey where it's bubbling up from what we could do and what we needed to do early in the going, and it's evolving. The funny thing is it's not done yet. I don't think we know the final answer. My best picture is we're going to really start to see more granular measure across the value stream. So we're going to see task specific. You've got that picture. We're going to see task specific measures of how we're doing it, and are we bottlenecking on some of those different steps in the process. And that's going to allow us to start to take more of an ROI view towards things like token consumption and spend. Early in the going, you're like, you're using tokens, that's great, you're doing stuff, that's good. I think at a certain point, we're gonna be like, wait, these are expensive if we're really using them at scale. Are we using the right model? Are we using it for the right tasks? Are we being judicious in our use? Just for example, I've been playing with some of the different spec-driven frameworks. And what you'll find is they have very different token consumption because their workflow may be heavier weight and more robust, or lightweight and a lighter touch. I think orgs are going to want to know that they're picking the right size for them and their needs.
Right. I think you've laid a very elegant picture there of the different kinds of tools in the SDLC, that you have so many, about the decisions that you're making. You're rolling it out, you're seeing people use it, right? But one of the other very interesting things that we're seeing is if you tune the way your SDLC is structured, you're able to drastically change the amount of velocity gains you're able to effect as a team. So I'd like to show you this visualization we've built based on Blitzy's autonomous SDLC. So we've been talking about AI assisted, and the entire industry is so focused on AI assisted because it's how everything started, and the industry has gotten quite good at that. But as we're talking about expansion, right? Yeah. So for example, we have designers in Blitzy that are shipping code end to end, UI with the backend integrated in production, one shot, right? So how do you move up to the next level, right? How do you bring in the creatives and give them the tools to make an impact, right? That's the expansion beyond that. So what we've done effectively is we've flipped the structure of the SDLC, right? Yeah. You have the roadmap, which is decided externally outside the coding itself. It's like a precursor step. But then everything from design, implementation, testing, security, and QA, you can deploy agents, orchestrate them autonomously, right? And do bulk of the work automatically, right? And then just rely on the humans for the final QA and deployment. You still have agentic QA that the platform does autonomously. But what I mean by final QA is really making sure that I can attest to the code as a human before it goes to production. Yeah. And when you've done that, we're seeing, like 500x, like 500%, 5x or 500% velocity increase, right, in deploying that. And I think the world is yet to even scratch the surface of the potential of something like this.
I agree. That's not normal in the wild to see 500%. It's simultaneously, it's a shocking number, but I also find it a very credible number, and I'll tell you why. What we see from use, sort of more individual use in the workflow, it depends on your style of work and your style of tool. If you start with the assistants, good adoption there seems to drive 10 to 20, maybe 30% improvement. If you go up the ladder to more agentic, this model where you're running, say, multiple Claude code sessions in the background, there you're starting to see 60 to 80% improvement. You get to really agentic, like actually you're running stuff more continuously, more in the background. You're able to scale beyond, human active oversight of the agents. That's where we're starting to see 100%. You've taken the next step of integrating the SDLC, and this was explored in the Dora report this year. We sponsored the Dora, Jellyfish sponsored the Dora report this year, and one of their key findings was, maybe not that surprising, but it was very, very vivid, was engineering is a system, and if you optimize one cylinder, you're not going to make the car go faster. You have to look at the whole thing. So by integrating, and I think this is what I see across the industry, so many engineers they're experimenting with their own integrated workflow, or they're using the spec-driven kits. You guys have taken it the next step of building more of this like custom integrated into your back end. So it's not surprising to me. It's amazing, right? It's a kind of crazy result, but it speaks to what, like, I think you guys are going to have to keep moving that up, because we're going to keep driving, I think, greater gains from individual use of the tools.
Yep, for sure. So for the CIOs that are looking at the impact that AI is making, and they're thinking about how do you get to the next level, because what we're talking about here is like, you could, with the, let's say you have successfully integrated the AI assisted SDLC, right? You're still looking at what was maybe like 3 years, you're still looking like 18 months, because the actual velocity gain is something like 40 to 50%. Yeah. The code acceptance is between, again, 40 and 60%. Yeah. So you're still looking at 18 months. But there's enterprises out there that are adopting this and are looking to do the same thing. These are your competitors, most probably. Like, they can do the same thing in 3 to 4 months, right? Yeah. And you're wrestling with, maybe you've cracked adoption, but you're wrestling with, how do I, from a CTO's perspective or from a CIO's perspective, how do I get to the next level and bring in the effects of AI across the broader stack of the SDLC, right? Yeah. So what would be your thoughts on that?
It's interesting, like, you're hinting there a little bit about there's been different orgs have adopted at different times, and then therefore have different work to do to change how people are operating to make more and better use of the tools. I think the benefit of maybe the late adopters has been they get to stand on the shoulders of all the hard work that's been done. I think we're not yet, it's not yet fully established what for example, like a best practice spec-driven workflow looks like for, say, using Claude Code in your environment. But you can see it, like I think there are orgs doing it exceptionally well. Those are the ones, when we look at our system data and we see a strong correlation between adoption and throughput improvement or cycle time improvement, and consistency of quality. It's adoption is the one driver we can measure very easily, but we also have had this strong suspicion that it's working differently. That's where you have people who are using it across the SDLC. It's not just that they're adopting it for coding tasks, but they're using it across the SDLC, and they are, they've invested in experimentation, iteration, sharing best practices, and that's why they're getting the impact. So, I mean, to me, the how you get there, I think orgs have to. It's interesting. When we got going, I felt very much like, orgs need to take a light touch here and not lose the narrative with engineers and be like, we're just going to replace you all with robots. Yet now, I think engineers are very rational. As it's gotten, the models have gotten better and it's more useful of a tool. I think it's a sell. It's a very credible sell to say, you should try this out. This is going to make you go faster. You can get more done. You can remove more of the boilerplate or the less interesting tasks. So I think I still stand by it's more of carrot than of stick. We should sell it. But I think we're getting to a phase where you can see how effective it is. And it's almost irresponsible now if you're not pushing your org to get there. You're leaving just so much good productivity and value you can create on the table. So, I mean, I'm always thoughtful. I think engineers do a magic job and bring the judgment and the architecture, and it's precious, and you'd never want to tinker with that. But I think we're at a point where selling it to them, even if they're a little skeptical, that we've got to make this transformation is necessary. And like the results you're showing and that you're seeing in many places, they rationally can be explained like, hey, it's not just a coding assistant. It's about how do you get into planning mode, do the task breakdown collaboratively with this thing, use some state management, like help this thing like make more sense, work in reasonable, batch units of work so that you're not context spelling and stuff. There's practices and I think it'll make rational sense to them that like, hey, this thing can be wild in terms of what it can do if I use it right, and we got to get on using it right. So, but you offer, I think like it's very interesting to me, a tool like Blitzy, packaging that up. I think it's a great shortcut in a lot of ways, and a great way to accelerate getting there.
Yeah. I think we're coming from you hinted at this, where from the standpoint of adopting spec-driven development or test-driven development. Yeah. When in the beginning, when the coding assistants started, getting popular, this is not a thing. But now we're seeing this, like every other tool has plan mode, right? Yeah. And we've seen that AI is actually good at doing test-driven development, which is why every other tool is now incorporating it. And it's like, it's kind of being forced down everyone's throat, right? Yeah. It used to be a dream, which is a good thing, right? It used to be a dream of the architects. Like, I wish everyone just wrote the test before they wrote the code, or wrote the test alongside the code, right? But now that's becoming a thing. So from the standpoint of touching, the design operation for let's say, or the QA operation, do you think there are similar learnings that we need to uncover for the team to get more effective? Like, should how would what would be the equivalent of spec-driven development or test-driven development for the design operation?
Whew, that's an interesting one. I think I don't have a crisp answer, aside from I feel that every part of the flow is being explored. So like I think I see more of the core development workflow, from planning to task breakdown to development to testing and deployment, and even honestly great stuff. I mean, the thing that maybe the meta answer to your question is, I keep being surprised by the creative ways that AI can be harnessed. There was a great blog a couple of weeks back by Charity Majors looking at pulling via MCP or a skill, pulling the honeycomb data, the observability data into the LLM so that it would have visibility to a performance issue, B, have the telemetry to actually understand it and relate it to the code, and therefore come up with a compelling fix like that much faster. And so I think there's use cases like that like once you hear it, you're like, oh, it sounds obvious upon hearing it, but I don't think I would have come up with it. It's just great. There's stuff like that I don't think we've seen anywhere near the end of innovation. And then I think the thing that's got to happen is, like you mentioned, TDD becoming suddenly, it went from discretionary. I think the thing about it is we're dealing with automation here. Like it has personality and stuff, but it's automation. I think it gives us an opportunity to be a little bit less bespoke and a little bit more like, this is the way. And so I think what we're going to see happen with these creative tools, be it in design or be it in observability or be it wherever in the stack, you're going to see us figure out, the industry is going to figure out the best in and under what conditions. It's going to be a more of a structured decision tree, and you're going to see those approaches get adopted. My hope with something like the metrics we create in Jellyfish is we'll give you a quantitative way to decide where in that decision tree do you fit, because it does vary. Let's face it, legacy code base, defunct code programming language, different than greenfield, new, and plus stuff that's yet to be seen. It's like, who even knows what the programming languages of the futures will be to better accommodate, the LLMs? I think there's probably power to be unlocked there by different representation as we work more in spec space, and the tools can be more almost like what happened with assembly language. I can read assembly language, but not many people need to go look at the assembly output from the C compiler anymore. It's just like a little bit of a lost art.
Yep. So tell us how, let's say, a CIO would use Jellyfish and decide which tools do I renew next year, which tools do I keep and maybe continue to evaluate, and which tools are absolutely crushing it and I need these.
I mean, the good news is it's a straightforward evolution. So far, it's a straightforward evolution of what they've already been doing, which is looking at a team basis and looking at a product basis and looking at, and looking at the metrics. This is the good thing that's happened in the last decade or so. There's been so much study of what metrics actually correlate with organizational performance. This has been, I think, the big contribution of Dora was their framework and the research that it was based on that looked at how things like change failure rate and rework rate and throughput, like, and cycle time correlate with business outcomes. I mean, so like you may not intrinsically see the linkage, but these are metrics that matter. The truth is initially, at least so far for a CIO or CTO, bringing in AI moves those metrics. So to answer your question, so far it's like being able to have a very crisp way to look at adoption and acceptance, like look at the performance of the tools, see that on one pane of glass so that you can compare across, relate that to metrics, be able to slice and dice that data, like look at it by team so that you can actually zoom in on the different levels of adoption, or time frame, which will also have different levels of adoption and different model availability, so that you can say like, okay, I can see that's where I was in the sweet spot with my metrics versus over there, that's not. I think the truth is, though, to the SDLC, it's going to get harder because they're going to need to look across more of an integrated system. That's why we're not done. Like I'd say what we offer now gives the CTO, CIO a good fighting chance to answer that question as they embark on 2026 here. I think we're going to if we were to stay still, it wouldn't cut it in a year's time. It's going to have to get a lot more sophisticated.
Right. And let's say you have you have this roadmap, right? And you have a time that you've decided that you want to get there, and now you have AI, right? And let's say you've just been successful at adopting it. So how could a tool like Jellyfish maybe tell you how can I tweak or tune the levers of who I assign to what? To make sure that I increase the chances of hitting my timelines? Yeah,
I think that is really like, I think that's where things have to go, is to be able to offer that sort of predictive capability. How do I cost optimize? And also, like, I think there's still going to be human judgment. I think, depending on the nature of the project or the nature of the task, you may or may not want more or less human involvement. That will affect how you work. I think what you guys do in a very integrated flow is, it's very autonomous, and that's great, like for certain tasks. But there may be tasks where you're like, oh, I want this to work in the open and have humans able to go in and be more integrated into the flow. I'm willing to trade off perhaps going a little slower for a little bit more human permeability. And I think like there's still going to be some of that needs to be able to happen. So I think you're going to want to have a quantitative view of your value stream, and be able to ask what ifs of like, what throughput do I get? What accessibility do I get for humans? Like, what are the properties of that stage in the flow, depending on different ways I configure it? Like, I could throw all the unlimited agent capacity at it. Probably doesn't make sense. Like, there's only so much flow based on the rest of the process. But you want a quantitative way, I think, to look at that and set those dials appropriately. So I think it's going to get it will get very sophisticated. We are going to, in the future, be making, I truly believe in a hybrid future where, people are still going to be very much involved in the creation of software, and they're not just going to be writing specs. I foresee a long time that we're going to want to have readability of code and understandability of code, which means that tells me engineers will still need to write code in order to cultivate that skill. I know for myself when I'm doing personal projects, like every fourth one, I just say, I'm just not going to touch AI, just as a discipline. It's like a silly thing, but I think some way of systematizing that into the professional world is going to be interesting. So we're going to be making these decisions about like, what automation do we throw at things? What people do we throw at things? What effects does that give us on our organizational capabilities? That's going to be important stuff in the future. It's going to be really interesting.
Right, that is awesome. One question that we see, one concern we see frequently floated around is, as AI is writing more and more of the code and the humans are signing off to a test to that code, right? So as the amount of code gets larger, there's not like any human that can fit all of it into his brain and at any point of time have all of the context. But on the flip side, you can just connect it to any AI tool and they can explain what's going on. But what do you maybe potentially lose? And then there are solutions to this problem. We've tried to solve this problem. But what you maybe lose is, what if the code isn't actually good enough? All right, maybe it compiles, maybe the unit tests pass, right? But what if it's not performant enough? What if it's not written in a way that it can scale according to the requirements of your roadmap, right? So what if you're actually accelerating the short-term roadmap because you're getting more code out, but you're compromising the long-term because the AI isn't aware of your long-term roadmap, right? Have you seen situations like that, and how have you thought through that?
It's funny, I don't think there's yet a good answer to that in the AI, the development AI space, and I think it still does fall to people. And this is why I understand, you can literally see right now the engineers who are on the cutting edge of using AI to develop code. You can literally see them as they write about it, saying more and more like, oh, I just stopped looking at the code. There's no necessity, or I look at it when I need to, if need be. But I think that like that's really hard if you care about the stuff you're talking about, which is the longer term dynamics of a code base. Let's face it, it's not just, is it for purpose now? It's what you said about the long-term roadmap. Architecture, a fundamental aspect of architecture is, what's my downstream cost model to do further changes that I couldn't anticipate perfectly, but I had some notion about? There's a lot of human judgment in that. And you make very real decisions about whether or not you're gonna, and let's face it, it's always, everything's possible. It's code. You can make it do whatever you want to, but it may cost you more or less, and you may be able to do it better or worse depending on the decisions you made earlier in the going. That's going to be interesting to see if we can, I think there's a sense that the models are getting more taste and more ability to handle those kinds of secondary sort of non-functional requirements. But I believe it comes back to what I said of like, we're going to still want these workflows and the state management. For example, like the ticketing system, I think there's like all this thought of like, oh, do we use things like beads that are more, but I still think we're going to want the workflows to be human inspectable, human involvable, for this very reason, in that we're going to want to, depending, let's face it, there's some apps that get written that are like internal, throw away, I don't need to look at the code. And then there's some stuff where you're like, this is a mission critical, innovative, core thing I do, and it's got to evolve for years to come, and it's a core value driver for me. I probably want people who understand that and can do that. Like what you said, like there are those amazing engineers who do understand the big picture, and they can help you when the chips are down, and resolve a crisis, or figure out discern what's the best evolutionary path for a given, new feature. I think people still are involved in that. This is me a little bit. Maybe it's because I've been doing computer science stuff for, 30 something years. It's like, and I have a bias, but I kind of think humans are still in the kitchen.
For sure. And I think I'll just share a different perspective on that. So this is a problem that's really important to us because we're talking about the autonomous SDLC, right? As you lay out in the future, you have the AI assisted, you have the agentic, and you have the completely autonomous version of it. So what you're essentially trading is you now need the AI to be this person that's been around for 30 years and that's always going to make the right decisions and you can trust them, right? Yeah. So how do you do that? So essentially one of the techniques we've applied is we have this underlying graph database that is a relational mapping and a semantic summarization of the entire code base. And as you use Blitzy, your enterprise instance of Blitzy catalogs the decisions that you and or Blitzy made during the process. Like for example, the choice of framework, the rationale for rejecting a change that Blitzy made or some other tool made because of XYZ. Your future roadmap even, right? You can feed that to Blitzy and or AI and give it the context of what you're trying to do with this code base in the future. So it doesn't get you in a rabbit hole right now that you cannot get out of, right? So there's tons of opportunities like that in the AI SDLC, or let's call it the autonomous SDLC, that make AI that much better. Like we talk about, it's funny how the world thinks that you need AGI to be able to make that kind of a difference, and the labs have led everyone to think that the model is the models are going to just be going to eat up everything. But there's so much value that you really have, and there's so much. It's all about the models are just tools, right? If you can give it the right context at the right time and apply it for the right application with the right persona, prompt, etc., you can get AGI-like behaviors. Like memory is considered, a human level performance is considered one of the hallmarks of AGI. Learning new skills, we probably can't do that, but you don't need to do that. Is the whole point, right? So you don't need to wait for AGI to come around and have this massive impact. Like you can do that today with today's tools with just the right amount of planning and a right understanding of the levers of the SDLC.
And why should it be surprising? Like we ourselves augment our own intelligence with everything from notebooks to calculator, like tools, right? Like make our own intelligence that much more manageable and effective. And I think like things like the knowledge graph, that was recently a great ThoughtWorks write-up about, they did a meetup about the future of software. And that was one. So I think like you guys were a couple of years ahead of the curve on that one. But I think some of these practices, like I said, I've never seen in all my life in software so much kind of massive attention on one topic. So it's this feeling that like these problems are being sorted and explored at like the fastest possible rate, just given the amount of brains on the planet. So I feel like these things are going to be discovered and shared.
Yep. So as we wrap, what advice would you give to CTOs and CIOs that are analyzing the impact of tools on their SDLC and making decisions about, we talked about, retention, renewal, but even changes, like maybe going faster or slower, right? What metrics should they use to make these decisions, and what impact should they expect?
Yeah. I think my advice, I answer this question all the time. My advice is calibrated to what your level of maturity is on this. I think starting simple, but just having some yardstick, be it PR throughput or be it like ticket throughput, something basic, just so that you can like have a measure. And let's face it, you can easily poke holes in how that doesn't capture the other parts of the process, but the process does all conspire to help you ship those units of work. So it does give you something. That's level one. Level two is, I say, don't go it alone. Stand on the shoulders of there's been a lot of thought. So like Jellyfish, we published a set of KPIs for AI impact. And that's on the blog there. So you don't have to use the product. The product itself, I would say like Jellyfish or other SEI products, they do take a lot of the toil out of gathering that data, normalizing that data. Some of the less obvious stuff about like, how do I go across these things and discern whether a PR was AI influenced or not AI influenced? The tools take that toil and head scratching out of it. So, I would say that's for if you're sort of at mid, like stay in the game on that stuff. Don't leave measurement as an afterthought because it's fast changing. You want to have a way to know where you stand. And I think for the advanced ones, it's like, I just encourage everybody to just keep on iterating, stay on the bleeding edge and keep experimenting because it's moving fast. It's moving fast. I do find sometimes emotionally, it could be a little exhausting. You're like, man, when is this going to just, it's a lot. But most days, say 3 out of 4 days, I think it's just super exciting because you're like, wow, we're in like a little bit of a science fiction territory here, and it's incredible to see, and it's incredible to be part of it. I feel blessed that my career overlapped to this moment, and we get to see how this is all going to play out and be part of it.
100%. I think we were in the most exciting time of our lives, especially for software development as an industry, like software as a field, and it's amazing to be a part of it. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for joining us.
Yeah, great conversation. Thanks for having me.